morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to our webinar, Production-Ready Data Apps at Enterprise Speed, brought to you by our friends at Plotly. I'm Brian Mink, co-founder and president of Data Science Connect, the world's largest data and AI community. Today, we're excited to welcome hundreds of attendees from all over the world to discuss the key strategies, challenges, and best practices for deploying impactful data applications at enterprise speed. Python data applications are revolutionizing how enterprises harness insights and drive operational efficiency. This webinar explores how organizations are rapidly scaling data workflows to build production-ready data applications that deliver real business impact. We'll dive into Broadband Insights' custom data analytics platform powered by Plotly-Enterprise and how it is helping internet service provider startups optimize network planning, streamline operations, and accelerate broadband deployment. Discover how this data-driven approach has led to 50% faster customer installation times and significant operational cost reductions. We're honored to hear from two distinguished experts today, Sam Tripp, Technical Account Manager at Plotly, and Patrick Hutto, CEO and founder at Broadband Insights. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. To make this feel a little more in person, we suggest you add a photo to your profile and include your bio, LinkedIn profile, and other information you want your fellow attendees to see. Next, please take advantage of the Q&A and chat feature throughout the webinar. On the right sidebar, we'll be addressing your questions throughout the webinar, so be sure to upvote the questions you'd like the panel to address. If you're wondering where your organization stands compared to others on your AI journey, check out the poll question in the right sidebar. And finally, to learn about deploying impactful data applications at enterprise speed, check out the calls to action below throughout the webinar from our sponsor, Plotly. Now, without further ado, I'm going to welcome Sam and Patrick to the stage. Welcome, guys.
Thank you so much. Yeah, well, thank you so much. Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Brian, for that introduction. So like you said, my name is Sam, and I'm a technical account manager at Plotly. So I support a wide variety of clients with their projects with Dash. So yeah, before we get into the main subject matter of today's webinar, I just wanted to differentiate between a few of the terms, because we throw around the terms Plotly, Dash, and Dash Enterprise quite a lot, and just want to clarify what exactly each of those are referring to. So Plotly is in reference to the open source graphing library. So that was one of the initial products that Plotly came out with back in 2013. It's got a JavaScript and a Python version, and it supports a wide array of chart types. And as you can see, it's got over 1 billion downloads with an average of 32 million per month, which puts it right up there with some of the big players in the open source graphing landscape. So that's Plotly. When you hear the word Dash, so that often refers to the Dash open source. So Dash in general is a Flask-based framework for building web applications in Python. So the way I like to think about it is it allows you to make a powerful and highly custom web application without needing to know a front-end language. So this is really appealing for a lot of folks who may be data scientists, quant analysts, business analysts, who you might already be working in Python, but don't necessarily have the skill set to build a front end in a more traditional stack. So as an open source product, we're fortunate enough to have a very large open source community. We've got hundreds of contributors and thousands, if not millions of users. So there's a lot of cool things being made in the open source world as well. So that's Dash. And from Dash open source, we evolved into our main product, Dash Enterprise, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But first, I just wanted to highlight some of the strides that Dash Enterprise has been making in the data and AI space. You can see that there was a 2024 survey that put it right at the top. And we're fortunate enough to have some big names as our customers, some of which you can see on the slide here. So speaking a little bit about what exactly Dash Enterprise offers. So I would say it's best to categorize it into 3 categories. So the first is the platform itself. So Dash Enterprise is a platform for hosting, sharing, and managing applications. So this includes a lot of different functionalities, such as sophisticated authorization and authentication with a high degree of granularity as far as what users can see within the applications. It also is a centralized location for managing the application. So it makes it easy to set up things like CI/CD pipelines, to schedule updates of data, to cache data for performance enhancements, to queue jobs. There's even a web IDE for doing development directly in the environment. So these are all things that are included with the Dash Enterprise platform. The second main thing you get with Dash Enterprise is the enterprise packages. So there are a few of them, about 5 or 6, but 2 that I want to highlight are as follows. So the first one is the Dash Design Kit. So when I was talking about Dash open source and I talked about writing Dash in Python, I would say that's mostly true. Maybe the part that I left out is that you have to do styling in CSS. And for anyone who has worked with CSS in the past, you might know that it's not always the friendliest tool to work with. It can be a little bit tedious. So Dash Design Kit makes it a lot easier to create applications with pixel perfect styling and branding and theming without getting too bogged down with CSS. Very little CSS is required with Dash Design Kit. So that's one of the enterprise packages. And another one of the ones that's worth highlighting is the Dash Snapshot engine. So this allows for sharing views of your Dash application and even converting some of the data into shareable PDFs that can then be shared to other stakeholders. So the third main thing that you get with Dash Enterprise is access to the Plotly team. So Dash can be a very simple product, but it can also be very complex. And I think that's part of what makes it so powerful. But of course, with complicated applications, sometimes our customers need a bit of support in making those. So that's where our customer success team comes in. Within the first 3 months of being a customer, there's support with the onboarding team to help find exactly the setup that works for you. And there's also always access to our solutions team and our account managers team for ongoing support, as well as our infrastructure team for anything related to getting Dash set up in your environment. So yeah, big 3 things are the platform, the enterprise packages, and the support from the customer success team. And hopefully that overview gives you all a bit more context into what we're going to be discussing today. So with that, I'll hand it over to Patrick to speak a little bit about what he's been doing with Dash Enterprise. Patrick, over to you.
Yeah, hey Sam, thanks for the intro. Yeah, so my name's Patrick. I run a company called Broadband Insights. We rely heavily on Plotly and Dash for most of our offerings. So on the screen here, you can kind of see a traditional ETL architecture. It's how we describe our services for our clients. And we work primarily for internet service providers and other broadband builders, some wireless, some fiber. So at the top, we kind of have what we call our data collector. We're going to get data through APIs, scripts, other processes. We bring that down to what we call our data refinery, which is just a large database. We have GIS functionality, we have time series functionality, all that's cloud hosted. We'll definitely talk about the architecture a little bit more. And then down at the bottom, the output of all of that is we do dashboards and analytics, which is the main reason I think most people use Plotly. So we have some really good looking figures, charts, graphs, dashboards. We also do traditional PDF reports, which Dash does an amazing job at taking data and making it look very traditional for investors or corporate folks or people that still print things on paper. And the last, we do a lot of detailed analysis. So being in Python ecosystem, we have pandas and we have a lot of other libraries that do really detailed analysis. So that's a service we perform for our clients as well. Yeah, so for those that aren't as familiar with the ecosystem of telecommunications and broadband in the US, right now, the digital divide is a very real thing. Basically, the large incumbent telecom providers built their networks close to 100 years ago, and everyone now has the need for high-speed internet. And in rural areas, sometimes there's very long, rough terrain to get to very low density for houses. That makes it very challenging for providers to see a return on their investment, and they're very reluctant to build. And then in the inner city and more urban areas, there's areas that's very complex to build with aging infrastructure, and there may be denser communities that profit-driven companies don't necessarily see the return for building dense urban areas. So luckily in the past 10 or 15 years, there's been a lot of public dollars and private dollars, BEAD program being one of the largest public programs to improve this infrastructure. The great news is instead of just the incumbents that have failed to serve for the last 30 years, a lot new ISPs have kind of popped up. They're people that basically start buying a bunch of radios and build their own wireless service provider called a WISP. And then a lot of other fiber builders, including electric co-ops, are really good at kind of building fiber and serving the rural areas. So this leaves a few challenges for folks that want to get into building a network. And even if they've been around 5 or 10 years, they don't have the history or the expertise that the large carriers have had for the last 30 or 40 years. So things like being able to keep track of where their assets are, network connectivity, their customer sales, they have a lot of disparate systems. And what the construction team may use to build what the operations team may need to track installs, what GIS planners do to plan the build are usually different teams and different systems. And getting all that data together is a really big challenge, and especially the financial case for serving the most amount of customers, either the most efficient way as possible or cheapest possible. Just data is very, very critical, and the large carriers know this, and they have large data science teams, whole departments related to this, but the smaller ISPs, they don't, and they don't necessarily have the budgets to start a 30-person team just to do analysis. So basically, we've used Plotly to build our front end. We started with kind of more ad hoc solutions. We used the open source version for a year or two, and ultimately the functionality of Dash Enterprise is exactly what we needed to kind of meet all our needs for our clients and for what we want to do internally. So pretty much built the platform out around Plotly. We use cloud Azure servers to kind of scale up and down for a lot of the functionality. And then we run some more services locally. We'll talk about the architecture in a minute. And Redis is actually hosted through Dash, and we're able to actually cache data and run things really, really quickly. When we started originally, we had some of our clients that some still use just spreadsheets, Google Sheets, Excel sheets to track. And we've kind of moved from getting data out of a CSV from a system, put in an Excel sheet or Google Sheet and emailing a report, or using some of the free solutions such as Looker Studio, to now we are running a real data warehouse, doing real analytics, and the ability to kind of use not just Dash, but other analysis libraries and tools. And the offering that we really do is we take the data from a lot of different systems, again, GIS maps, operations, financials. We put together in one easy to get place. And one of the other features is it's mobile friendly. So you can look at all the data, not just in a PDF report, not just on a desktop looking at a pie chart or a time series graph, but you can pull it up on your phone, or we just email out daily reports.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in and mention, so the mobile responsiveness, this is something that is included with the Dash Design Kit. So building a Dash open source, it can be tricky to do that responsiveness, but with Design Kit, it pretty much works out of the box for mobile responsiveness.
So here's an overview of our basic app architecture. We'll go through the specifics of Dash, but we'll start on the left, what we kind of call our data collector. We run these processes, sometimes webhooks, sometimes triggers, but we use Azure Functions as our serverless offering. It's similar to AWS Lambda, where we're kind of call a script whenever it's needed and not just run servers all the time. We use Pipedream, which is a cloud offering that has a lot of pre-built integrations already. So it'll connect to popular applications like HubSpot, Google Sheets, Excel, QuickBooks, but it also lets you run custom Python code. So for some more advanced APIs where we have to write the calls specifically, we can still run them in a cloud. We can link them in a chain with other more traditional systems and processes. And currently we're migrating to Dagster, which is a more mature pipeline tool that models everything as a graph, so we can see our inputs, outputs, do troubleshooting on the way. Again, it's very embedded in the Python ecosystem. So we run all these collectors in the cloud, and every night we do a lot of data crunching at about 12 a.m. to 2 a.m. where we snapshot a lot of data, we build a lot of wide tables, we do a lot of analysis. So we call this our data refinery. Right now we use Azure hosted Postgres instance to scale up and down. And we use crunchy data that lets us add some additional management on top, like backups, hosting, SSL encryption. For our actual application, we run this bare metal. We run a Ceph cluster, so distributed flash storage running on 10 gig network. We run our database for PostGIS for all our GIS maps, and Postgres for our traditional analytics. And with Dash, we have a few extra column types that make them really good just using Postgres. We have a load balancer that we run, so we're not hitting the database with an extreme amount of calls. When we get into Dash and the callbacks, it can be a lot, but Dash has some really good solutions with Redis to solve the problems of kind of overloading the database. So the stack that's shown is fairly typical. We run Proxmox for virtual machines and Ubuntu Server to actually host the application. We run a small Kubernetes cluster, and then Dash Enterprise is what our apps run on top of. So each of the apps have the ability to have a few different services that we can run. So there's actually embedded Redis instance in each app. So again, we have, when our app starts, we're able to talk to the database once. We have the cache, which will keep our pandas data frames or other kind of already cut up slice and dice data, where every time we're running a callback, it's very, very quick. Celery is used for scheduling to pull data down from the cache. And then gUnicorn Worker lets us serve to the customers. Dash also gives the ability to run replicas. So we can decide if a lot of people are hitting one, we can bump up to 4 or 8 replicas. They'll make the gUnicorn workers run more threads so we can actually solve any performance problems before they become a problem. We also use the embedded Celery instance to take report snapshots. I'll let Sam talk a little bit more about the functionality, but at a high level, we're able to get the raw data in a JSON format in Postgres, and we save the PDFs. So daily, weekly, monthly, we'll save the PDFs. And with Celery, we also send out emails and send Slack notifications straight from the Dash app.
Yeah, so this workflow leverages a lot of built-in capabilities of Dash Enterprise. So like Patrick mentioned, the Redis, the Celery, and the Junicorn workers, that's all stuff that you get with Dash Enterprise. And these are actually fairly standard workflows. We have a lot of our customers working with these things. So during the first few months of Patrick becoming a Dash Enterprise customer, our onboarding team worked with him to establish this workflow and figure out that this was the workflow that made the most sense for his business case.
All right, so with that, we'll show a couple example applications that we run. The first one is really detailed telephone polls. I look at telephone polls every day. I'm sure everyone does. And then we'll look at a more robust application of a multi-page app that has a little bit more functionality and tailored for different user groups.
And just while Patrick's pulling that up, I think one thing to highlight as well is that, and Patrick, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on this. But prior to using Dash, there wasn't a lot of Python experience between you and your other developer, and it's pretty incredible, that he was able to create all of this within, going from very little knowledge at the start to making these sophisticated applications. Certainly, if this was done in full stack, it would not be this straightforward. So I think that's definitely one of the nice things about Dash.
Exactly. And Sam, if you'll do me a favor, if the screen does not update or I'm talking about something that's there, just give me a heads up.
Yeah, will do. Looks good for now.
So right now, this is an application to do what we call a make-ready assessment or make-ready analysis. So one of the challenges with people that are trying to install internet cables in the air to compete with some of the existing providers is you have to attach to utility poles or telephone poles. There's a lot of them, very easily, tens of thousands of poles that you have to attach to. So the cost to attach to a pole can be as little as $250 or as high as $25,000. We've seen many cases where a pole may have been put in the 60s. It has a transformer and a lot of reconfig work that needs to do. So when you're designing a route, a network has to connect. So it's similar to a graph where you're going to have a route that connects from A to B. And every single pole is a node that can have a very low cost or very high cost. So it's a large amount of data to think about, visualize, and plan. So on the map here, this uses Leaflet, which again, very easily embedded into Dash. It's a JavaScript library. I am not a big fan of JavaScript or CSS. I do enough to get by, but we're very easily able to get the data from our data warehouse, render it in Leaflet, and embed it in Dash. So here we have large amount of polls that we're able to collect data on. We color code them basically by the cost, the complexity to build. So a planner can kind of look for the green areas that may be very inexpensive to deploy fiber, or the yellow and red areas that may be areas to avoid or find alternate build methods. So we can see kind of our telephone poles, and then with the callbacks, we're able to kind of click on any pole. We have this call to the Street View API where we can kind of see that location. We have just raw data table with some of the information about the pole. And then we're actually able to kind of use some of the 3D libraries to see a visual of the pole. So we could tell here, okay, we may want to go on this path, but one of these may have to be changed out and go larger. So maybe our model didn't catch that this maybe have been a yellow or a red pole.
Yeah, so one thing I think to highlight here is, so a lot of these charting components that are used, these are created by the open source community. So a lot of JavaScript libraries that exist, someone in our community will create a Dash wrapper for it, so it can be easily plugged into Dash applications. And I think that's nice because you're not limited by the suite. What we offer, anything that the open source community has made, you can also use within your Dash applications. And one other thing I'll just note as well, so in terms of the closed source packages, I talked a little bit about Dash Design Kit already, but all of the coloring that's happening on the figures here, this can be easily configured via Dash Design Kit. So there's like a menu where you can select the colorway or the color scheme that you want, and then that's automatically going to be applied across your application for that nice consistent theme.
So I'll flip to the other app again. Sam, just let me know if anything does not look correctly. So yeah, that's one thing we generally mark it in color code with our client's branding. And yeah, with theme editor, again, it saves hours of CSS if we could go and really quickly kind of change any of the fonts or the styles. Dark background, light brown. And then with callbacks, when we actually change URL, we're able to load different style files. So for example, if we look at 8.5 by 11 report, we may want it look white on black instead of the reverse. So this is an example of our multi-page app. So again, we have kind of some time series data that we get from our data warehouse. This is one that renders really good on a phone if you were to pull it up remotely.
Yeah, so I guess just wanted to highlight as well, and it looks like Patrick's pulled it up here as well. But this is the kind of data that can be easily shared into a PDF format using the snapshot engine. So looks like Patrick's got that pulled up on the screen. But that can be configured to programmatically generate a shareable PDF based on the data that was highlighted in that application. And like Patrick mentioned as well, this styling can be different. So the Dash Design Kit gives you that granularity to have different styling depending on the format of the outputted data.
Yeah, what's really amazing about this style report is we can generate something that looks really nice, like what you'd see in an earnings release, but it's still the data is built in pandas, and we are able to quickly change the model, change the schema, and even the figures. These are interactive. So if I go to a URL and I go this, I can actually interact with any of the graphs. But with Snapshot Engine, we're able to basically take a PDF of what this looked like. So we could say, this is what this report looked like at the end of May. Here's what it looked at the end of June. Here's what it looked like at the end of July. And we're actually able to load up both this interactive version. So you could say, what did July look like? And still click on or interact with any of the charts or graphs. And obviously we can save the PDFs. Again, they get saved as a blob in Postgres.
Yeah, and that Postgres database is also included natively with Dash Enterprise.
So for those that are not familiar with telecommunications, one of the largest problems with BEAD or any of the deployments right now, make ready and coordinating moves on the poles is very challenging. But the other thing is going through permits. So this is a geospatial problem and a time problem. And that if you're trying to build a network, it needs to connect multiple customers together. And if you're crossing a DOT highway, you're going to have to get that section of conduit permitted with the DOT. If you're going through a city or municipal boundary, you may need to have a permit with them. If you're attaching to poles, you may need to get rights or joint use application from the pole owner. So you end up with a lot of polygons that impact lines, and it's very hard, if not impossible, to kind of track. So this is an application we built that uses some really rich data that's tracking on permits, but we're also able to kind of roll things up and visualize them on a map. And with the DDK library, we've kind of laid things out with cards where we have our KPIs. Then we have kind of some charting and colors. But if I actually wanted to look up detail on a specific package, here I'm going to select a permit that I know I want to, or a package I want to check on. You can see everything updated. Here we're using -AG grid to kind of show us our raw data. We could tell 3 of our permits are approved, 2 have been submitted, and maybe we have an estimated date on when they would get approved. But we can also see where this is on the map. This is not my best work color-wise, but we can kind of still have the ability to hover, get data about each one of these entities with their GIS geometry. And then we also have the ability to filter the map.
Yeah, and these tables were created using a -AG grid. So many of you may be familiar with AG grid, which is a very popular charting library. So Dash has a wrapper for that as well. And there's a lot of sophisticated things you can do here. So that this coloring that Patrick's got in this column, the red and green coloring, that's easy to do with AGGrid as well. And there's quite a lot of filtering and sorting and even like row grouping and some crazy stuff you can do with AGGrid. So makes it really handy that it just plugs directly in.
Down here a lot more, we built a graph that we kind of model upstream network with. So we look at, there's quite a lot of permits. And then we also have the ability to just do traditional figures. So this is just a scatter that kind of has the estimated SLAs on dates for how long it takes you to submit a permit after finishing design to when it actually gets approved. So here, kind of each permit is a point, but we can kind of see that one we selected as its timeline to see it's kind of above or below the average.
And Patrick, do you want to speak a little bit about what was required to take this, or to build all of this? Like I mentioned briefly, that it sounds like there was not a lot of experience at the start, and it was fairly easy to develop this. Do you want to speak a little bit more about what was required there?
Yeah, so this was one, I think Sam mentioned it earlier, one of the members of our team actually came in with a large data analysis background, working in Power BI and understanding just basic SQL and data, but no experience in Python at all. And within just a few months, able to kind of get going in pandas, data frames, creating figures, publishing Dash, doing the applications. But this whole library, or sorry, this whole page was made just over the course of a few weeks, where we're able to have Dash AG grid, callbacks, KPIs, and then even the leaflet map and all the hovers. Again, we didn't really have to learn any JavaScript. We're able to kind of write most of it in Python. So that's an example of someone data analysis background, but not ton of a Python background, was able to build this just with a few months of practice and tutorials.
Yeah, and our solutions team is great for helping with sort of that debugging. So we have a lot of customers who will share code snippets that they're stuck on, and then we've got our solutions engineer who help them debug whatever it is they're working. So if you think this might be for you, but you're not very experienced with Python, don't worry, we can definitely support you getting started with Dash.
This is another example. Just go real quick. This is again the ability of, we can do a weekly report. So again, we have a salary worker that will pretty much pull the data down once a week. Create a report that we will issue out via email. Here we show that we can both do the 8.5 by 11 or 11:17 printable format, but we also maybe want to apply some custom coloring theming. And again, the figures are actually interactive if we log in, but they can be sent out via email as well.
And it's possible to, authenticate users, in a lot of different ways. So like Patrick mentioned, if they're logged in, they can see this, but you could also have it such that, depending on the user's identity, they might see a different report, or maybe they only see reports, that are associated with their organization, or maybe that, they can only see certain pages in the report, depending on who they are. So all of that is possible to do.
Yeah, there was a lot of reasons why we ultimately went with Dash Enterprise. There was 4 or 5 really big solutions, and authentication was one of them. So Python has a few ways to do it, or you can roll your own, but the ability to link with other SSO providers and be able to really quickly have a user and auth, that's another huge benefit. We're able to add user accounts or remove user accounts in minutes. So this is one of the more complex applications. If I'm not talking to engineers, I generally skip it because I think it gives a lot of people a headache, but I just love showing off the functionality of callbacks. So here we have a GIS map that represents a network that's under construction. Every one of these polygons represents what we call a serving area. So there may be 200 to 500 customers that could be served once the network's built in these areas. And then the lines are basically the network electronics. So what we generally call is ring, feeder, and distribution fiber. So here we kind of show the progress of the build. And with callbacks, we have a lot of data on each one of these serving areas, kind of tell with the hover a few, and the same for the points. So we actually have the ability to color code based on some of these different properties. So one is, if we want to just get an overview of how the build's going, we can look at the network status. So here we can tell, well, all these areas we're able to take customers and order service, but the purples and blues, there's still some phase of construction. And with planning, it's very hard to imagine the network, or maybe the most cost effective or the highest amount of what we call take rate, which is the amount of customers we think will be there. So if we're building an area with 100 customers and we think 20 will sign up, we'd say that's a 20% take rate. But if we think 60 would sign up, that's a 60% take rate. So we generally try and build to the areas that people have the most want for first. And for a traditional planner, if you're looking at a map, you go, well, this area over here has a really good take rate. It's really close to this green area. Maybe we want to build. But with Dash, we're actually able to not only have the map, we use one of the graphing libraries called Cytoscape. And with a callback, we can actually link the two together. So here we actually have a graph representation of our network. The center node is the ring. These are our feeder legs, and these are our serving areas. So they're still color coded that we can tell this feeder leg is actually green. It's all built. This area may be built, but our ring is actually not quite finished yet. So we're not able to serve customers. So we can, with callbacks, link back and forth between the graph view of the network and the overview of the network. And for further analysis, we can do things like maybe we just want a map of the take rate. So what areas have the highest take rate? We could go, okay, well, this one over here, this is one where a lot of people want to sign up. So maybe we build it first, and we can kind of look at what it would take to get the network turned up to get to that point. So one of the things that we've been working on for the past couple months, we're super excited to show, is actually adding some chatbot functionality. The latest version of Dash actually has chatbot built in. So we don't, so one of our other pages, we have what we call our monthly metrics. That's more of a view for the investor or operational person, where here we have a box that has all the data from the database by time. So how many subscribers there are, how many connects we did this month, and then the financials of how much we're making. The ability to actually swap between charts and data to look at trends. And then for anyone that works in Excel, Excel sheets can get really long, and here we have the ability to look up stats and add them to our figure. We also want to know our trend of 300 megabyte subs. There was none, and then starting August, we took on a lot. So the chatbot functionality is something that we're trying to do on this monthly statistics. With the callbacks, there's two options here. We're working on two use cases. One is basically to generate the raw SQL so that a data analysis could be done where we can go and pull some more detailed data from the database. So someone could just look at it, view it in Excel, CSV, or use some other analysis library, or the ability to just get high-level insights through the cache. So let's talk about SQL first. Here we're using a custom model. We use Olama, and we've kind of trained it just to work on SQL really well.
So I'll just note that, so this interface we're seeing for the chatbot, so this is how it looks out of the box. So there was no additional styling that Patrick needed to do to create the interface for the chatbot. And then, we'll talk in a second, I guess, about hooking it up, to the backend, but that was very straightforward as well.
Yeah, I think it took less than a month for us to actually get this implemented. So here we've just asked a question. It's kind of trained on our schema, but we're kind of ask it for one of our daily metrics. So here it's basically going to give us the raw SQL back. So it's kind of interpret our natural language question and turn it to just a query. So this one's valid SQL metric name, date, value. Those are columns, our schema, and this query will work. But since it kind of now knows a little bit our context, we can say, I can tell, okay, it's the same type of query. We're just going to update one of the parameters.
And the interface for this is very straightforward as well. Patrick, sounds like you just had to basically specify the model name, some authentication, some credentials, and that was pretty much all you needed to do. Just plug it into the chatbot interface and make it work like this.
Yep. And so Sam and I worked together. He helped me kind of figure out talking to the Redis cache directly. So basically we have a second model loaded. So with a callback, we have this radio button. It's going to change the context and the backend we're using. So this one uses the Open AI API, and we can ask just more general questions. So what is the trend for subscribers between May and October? And I've actually had a few of these where we typo and it will kind of guess what you meant, which is insane just in itself.
Definitely.
So here we get kind of that executive level secretary. Okay, the trend, the gradual increase from here to here, and it actually knows the numbers. So we basically have pivoted the pandas data set so it could be read more like a large document. So here it can actually pull data relevant to things. So it kind of knows the data that we had in October.
Yeah, and it's handy having a Python backend because in Python, doing those kind of data transformations are very straightforward, just a few lines of code needed. Not always the case in other languages. So keeping it within the Python ecosystem makes it easy to do these kind of transformations. And I'll just echo what Patrick said as well. So this is using the Dash Enterprise native Redis database. So yeah, there's a lot of performance enhancements when the data is cached. So that way, every time you ask a query, it doesn't have to pull the data directly from the data source. They can use the cache version in Redis for enhanced performance. And I think that for a lot of folks who may not be as familiar with the context of some of this data, or they might just look at this chart and be overwhelmed and not know where to start, the chatbot is a really nice way of disseminating that data in a more understandable and easily readable way. So makes it accessible to lots of different folks.
So this is one thing where just kind of giving data into the hands of decision makers has some really real world results. So one of the first things we saw early on was we started issuing daily reports. And basically this was a new internet provider that was able to take sales, but they still had teams to schedule the installs. And one of the challenges we had is the sales team was doing a really good job. And we started issuing a report every day that would show how many sales we had. We had 10 sales, we had 20 sales, we had 30 sales. On the same report, we're actually able to see the installations were being completed. And with probably less than 2 weeks worth of having a daily report that was automated scheduling out, they could tell they were taking a lot more sales than installs. And we're able to bring 2 more crews in, and basically this says 50%, but triple or quadruple probably the amount of installations done, and really reduce the timeline from being able to take a new sale and install customer from 60 to 90 days down to within 2 weeks. And ultimately we're able to get the installs down to 3 or 4 days. And this was able to be done basically because we had the data from different sources in a PDF that went out every day, where we didn't have to wait till the end of the month to run a report or do some detailed analysis. Just on traditional reporting, we also just save a large amount of hours a month. Again, legacy process, maybe connecting to a system, downloading a CSV, putting it into another tool like Power BI or Google Sheets or Looker, able to just automating the pipeline straight to the reports just saves a huge amount of hours every month. So subscriber growth was another area, again, giving the visibility of the map and kind of the areas that have the most demand for service and able to turn those up quicker. Spending the same amount of money to build, we're taking the same amount of time to build, but just by prioritizing the build a little bit better, we're actually to have more subscribers quicker, which is more cash flow, which is great for business. And then overall, again, one of the great things about Dash is giving visibility to the data. So we're able to give read-only access to a large amount of people. And for someone that just needs to go in or look at some statistics or some numbers or view some simple things on a map, we're actually able to save them some of the other enterprise licenses they have. So for example, a fiber designer may have customized GIS software they use to design the network. If there's no other visibility in the network, they may have 2 or 3 licenses for someone to go in and view that. But by us being able to actually take the data out of the database, keep that map geometry, we can serve a very simple map for an executive level person or a manager level person without having to buy a very expensive specialized GIS application. So we're actually able just to save money on the OpEx of less proprietary software licenses.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for giving us that overview. This is pretty incredible, and especially considering that there was very little experience beforehand. I think this is amazing what you've come up with, and it really utilizes a lot of the enterprise features as well as some of the open source features. So yeah, just if you're interested in doing some further reading, there's a few links here that you can check out. So the first one is our documentation. So our docs are very, very thorough, not only in terms of what we offer, but getting down to specific documentation for implementing our graphing library or Dash. So there's lots of stuff out there. It's not listed on the slide, but I would also encourage you all to check out the Plotly community forum. Any question that you have about Plotly or Dash, there's a good chance that someone else has encountered the same thing, and there's a lot of discussion going on in the forum. The forum is generally very, very active, so that's a good place to get your questions answered. You can also check out the GitHub. So there's the repositories for Dash and Plotly, and you can check out the releases to see what's included in each release, as well as the change log to see what changes happen. And if you're interested in seeing at Dash Enterprise, then you can check out this link on our website, and you can get in contact with someone from our side to walk you through specifically how you can get started with it. So yeah, that's about that. So next, I'll just have a look at the chat just to go through some questions. It's always amazing seeing the variety of places that people come from. We really do have like a global community of Dash, so that's really awesome to see. There was a question related to Fast API. So Flask framework, is there any downsides to hooking it up to an ASGI server like Fast API? So I would say there's not really any major downsides, and certainly I've seen customers before embed their dashboards within Fast API. I guess the only potential downside is you might lose some of the Dash Enterprise features. So like if you are doing authentication via Dash Enterprise, you might not be able to do that the same way using Fast API. But generally speaking, it plugs in pretty seamlessly. Had another question about the name of the graphing library. Yeah, so there's a few different ones. So sort of the core library is just called Plotly. But then there's quite a few other. There's Dash Cytoscape, Dash Leaflet, like Patrick mentioned. So yeah, quite a few of those as well. Really, I would say honestly, if there's a JavaScript library that you use, just Google it, and there's a really good chance that someone has created a wrapper for it in Dash. And even if they haven't, there's actually also a process that you can create your own Dash components if you have an existing React component, and that's a pretty common workflow as well. And yeah, and this is another question about Redis. So saying it's mostly for longitudinal data. So yeah, so Redis certainly can be used for longitudinal data, but it's actually pretty flexible. Anything that can be JSON serializable is fine to use in Redis, and it's very straightforward to unpack it within your Dash code. So yeah, really any kind of data is good in Redis.
Yeah, and Sam, I'll elaborate a little bit more on the rest. I think I touched on earlier. So early on, we were using it's called the DCC store, and I think it's part of open source, where we're actually caching a lot of the data we were using in the browser, and especially the maps. It was just a large amount of data. Performance was terrible, and kind of when we started scaling and replicating, it was just crashing. And then when we actually got the Redis functionality, the Plotly team was super helpful, and not just like, hey, you should use Redis, but hey, let's look at your app, let's figure out the replicas, let's figure out the callbacks. And yeah, we're able to cache. The main thing we do is the pandas data frame. So again, we'll load up a page, we'll talk to the database, and we may make 4 to 10 different data frames with different filters, different pivots, different groups. Like Sam said, we'll serialize those, keep them in Redis, but we have other data in there like JSON data for the map data. So yeah, it's super flexible, but yeah, we're caching data frames in the raw pandas format. Just loading and pulling out, it's extremely quick.
Definitely, and especially for these production grade apps that are used by end users, that performance matters a lot. So yeah, it's really awesome to leverage Redis in that way. We had another question. So are all the features from JavaScript's AG Grid available for AG Grid in Dash? Yes, I believe they all are. I know AG Grid, sometimes you need a license for it. So some of those features are not accessible unless you have the license. However, that distinction, I believe, is made pretty clearly in our Dash AG Grid documentation. But as far as I know, everything in the JavaScript AG Grid is available in the Dash AG Grid as well. And that one is very actively maintained. So bug fixes usually get resolved pretty quick in that one.
Yeah, one other cool thing I don't think is on here, again, not like the most fancy feature, but we have the ability, basically, it's just a parameter, enable export to CSV, yes or no. And yeah, with the AG Grid tables, you just get a button at the top that says export to CSV. So if you have a page or multiple pages that each have their own Dash AG Grid, a user can just export them to CSV, and it's literally not even a line of code, it's one parameter.
Okay, so we've got another question here talking about how Dash Enterprise compares the deployments compared to some of the competitors. So yeah, I mean, not all of the competitors offer the same options that Dash does. So for example, something like Tableau, it's got a bit more, limited flexibility in terms of the APIs that can be used with it. You can create reports with it, but there's just not as much, flexibility with how it can be customized, as well as the interactivity. As far as scaling goes, Dash Enterprise does that very well. Looker Studio, maybe it's limited when the data gets complex. Deployments.
Yeah, Yeah, I
mean,
can talk about
sure.
deployment a little bit. So I ran open source for about a year. And again, we kind of went through GitHub Actions. We deployed stuff to Azure. Again, we kind of used their app service, which is similar to, I think, AWS's Elastic Beanstalk. So we ran open source where we did our own deployments, CI/CD through GitHub Actions for a while. And it worked and it was fine. But yeah, the scaling, Dash Enterprise is much better at scaling. Yeah, when I want to ramp up workers, when I want to do replicas. And part of the package when we got it is you're actually running an on-prem version of Git and other tools that actually build. So it kind of, our CI/CD process changed completely, but everything kind of builds, deploys straight to Dash Enterprise. You can roll back to previous versions. And again, you can pick your replicas and scale just like a slider. So yeah, deployment got so much easier. We have these other benefits like authentication, snapshot engine, and the UI libraries, but yeah, scaling so much easier. It was a little bit of a learning curve to set up, but yeah, the Dash team, the support team kind of walks you through everything, but just yeah, much simpler than trying to learn everything on your own.
Yeah, and our infrastructure team, they're great, and also, in cases where maybe there's like an outage for whatever reason, we have a very fast response time. So if server crashes and customers are waiting, we can usually get on a call pretty quickly to resolve whatever that is. And yeah, I guess without Dash Enterprise, you don't necessarily have that same support. Fantastic. Not seeing any other questions coming through. But yeah, thank you so much to everyone for your questions and for listening today. It was really a pleasure to share what we've been doing. And thank you so much, Patrick.
Yeah, pleasure.
Thanks, guys. Just a few words for our audience as we close out. I appreciate all of you joining us today and the great insights from our speakers, Sam and Patrick. If you missed any of the webinar or want to rewatch anything, the recording will be available just a few minutes after this webinar concludes. If you just refresh this page, it'll be the same URL. We'll also send out the recording tomorrow, and it will be posted to our YouTube channel as well by tomorrow morning. I want to say a special thank you again, both to Sam and Patrick and to our partners at Plotly for making this webinar possible. And we'll see all of you again next time. Thank you.
Thanks so much.